This is the Early AI podcast hosted by Seth Earley. Join us as we delve deep into the passions, expertise, and experiences of thought leaders and practitioners to talk about what's possible with artificial intelligence. The Early AI podcast is sponsored by Early Information Science, your digital transformation journey with design and deployment of innovative technology solutions, as well as Vector. Now enjoy the show.
Welcome to the Early AI podcast. I'm your host, Seth Earley, and in each episode, we explore how artificial intelligence is changing the way we look at data and business problems and business strategy and business operations and see how things are evolving in this very, very fast-moving space. Today, we're going to talk about AI translation and global content strategy, a space where the stakes are high, the complexity is underestimated, and the gap between a working demo and a production system at enterprise scale is wider than people realize. There are 7,000 plus languages in the world. That blows my mind, that statistic. And the assumptions that work for Romance languages fall apart quickly everywhere else. Joining me today is Olga Beregovaya. Did I get that quite right?
Oh, almost there.
Almost there. Beregovaya. Vaya. No N. Beregovaya. Okay.
Yes.
VP of AI at Smartling, an AI-first translation and global content platform. Olga brings 25 years of experience in natural language processing and linguistic machine learning, spanning every major evolution in the field, from rules-based systems through to statistical models, neural translation, and now LLMs. She served as CEO of a machine translation company, led language technology at Autodesk for over a decade, and now leads AI at Smartling. Olga, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
So we start off, I like to talk about what people don't understand, the misconceptions and about AI and specifically your space. When you talk to executives and technology leaders about AI translation, what do they most consistently get wrong?
Okay, the first thing that's gotten wrong most consistently is looking at the price sheet for commercial provider tokens and just saying, hey, why can I just not pay whatever, let's say $7, right, per million tokens and call it a day, plug it into my ecosystem. So I guess a lot of people just get mesmerized by the price and do not realize the complexities behind. And that's actually one of the most frequent conversations that we're having with executives and say C-suite executives, senior leadership executives, like, guys, yes, you can totally consume your million tokens at a super low price point, but what exactly are you buying for this money? So I guess the simplicity and accessibility and like everything is available right now and I could just do it myself within a day, that's probably the biggest one.
And how do you really illustrate that? Like, how does that manifest itself? And, when is one of the things that we talk about is the need for information architecture when it comes to artificial intelligence. But there are instances where you don't need it, right? You can drop 400 PDFs into a SharePoint repository. You can run Copilot against it, and you can get some answers. And of course, there are use cases like that, right? And my answer to that is, well, what would have worked without that any curation or any information architecture for Copilot would work with full text search because it's curated content. It's not messy content. It's usually a well-maintained application. This happened to be about standard operating procedures. So you have to concede that argument that sometimes it's okay to not have IA for your AI. When is it okay to do the simple way? What are the use cases where that argument is reasonable?
My message, and that's what I usually share, is just separate branded content versus not branded content. In other words, if it's the content that represents your brand, and if it's outbound content that represents your brand, and you're super sensitive to your brand tone and voice in the market, then Copilot is not a good idea. And I'll actually use a specific example. So if it can carry any kind of potential brand damage, or if it can carry any liabilities with it. And a great example would be, for instance, CROs or any kind of documents in regulated industries like life sciences, like pharma, right? You can do it, but why would you if it can potentially bring about a lawsuit? And that's the last thing you want. So that's the no.
So the converse of that, to say when it does work, is when you have more pedestrian content that doesn't impact the brand. It's not branded content. It's like a disclaim, maybe, I don't know what the right example is, but do you have examples of when it would be okay just to use a simple LLM?
1000%. And you just use the term that I might need to steal from you from this point on, which is pedestrian content. I never heard that one before, but it's a great way of putting it. In our industry, in language technology industry, we say user generated content, right? So UGC, for instance, if it's internal comms and all you need is just process internal emails, don't overthink it. Copilot is the way to go, right? Or say user feedback, even more so in less specialized industries, the industries that are less dependent on language specific industry specific terminology, right? Like retail, user reviews, opinion portals. Go for it. Totally go for it, plug it in, and you're golden.
And that makes sense. And when there is risk, when there is a regulated industry, when you do have brand sensitivity, that's when you really need to think about it more carefully. Is there anything else that they don't get right? Is there anything else that they misunderstand or misconstrue?
I think it's like, okay, so the first message was more, I guess, about marketing and business owners, right? And you're marketing, and if you own your company's business and the geo, again, you should be very sensitive to your brand voice. And I'll just a little bit of an aside. I was talking to a senior level executive from not even Fortune 500, not even 100, not even 50, more like Fortune 10 company. And they installed one of those co-assistant, co-pilot tools. I'm not going to call it out. And he's like, yeah, it's great, except my company has 300,000 employees. And now my company has 300,000 voices. And that's not necessarily what I was prepared for in different countries. So that's one thing that people do not think about, right? Again, everybody can totally produce a translation or generate copy, but is it going to, if I have my voice, like let's say both of yours because of Spanish, I have my voice, you have your voice, and that content is going out. That's not necessarily something you want. And now the misconception is, and now I'm going to speak more of engineering and information architecture language. First of all, people totally underestimate the importance of data integrity when it comes to in-platform data that they're going to be using RAG into or some kind of agentic approach into. Data integrity, both engineering-wise and linguistics-wise, and data interoperability is key. And I don't think people really estimate that what comes from Git should really be able to talk to what comes from your content management system. Right. And AI and large language models specifically, nothing I think is more sensitive to garbage in, garbage out than language technology. And the other one, I don't think I was just talking to our VP of engineering, and he just showed me the log of all the events that happen in the platform to process a chunk of text. And I think people just assume content in, content out. But in reality, for instance, large language models do not play well with special characters. They just don't. They don't like emojis as much. So I think people don't understand the importance of information architecture and governance and the pipeline, right? Before you can send anything to the model, make sure that the model is not going to choke on it. Very simple. Your inline tagging, like good old WYSIWYG HTML, can completely stall your entire translation process and your entire delivery process. So I think engineering complexity, and data integrity is another one people are not paying enough attention to.
And they don't necessarily realize that is very important for language translation as it is for retrieval and access. And so what you're saying is it's really the processing pipeline and making sure that it is understandable by whatever tool you're using and being able to get quality results out of that. And there may have to be some pre-processing in order for that to happen.
Absolutely so. And there is a lot of a lot of experimentation is going on now, and some very successful, marrying the knowledge management, which obviously would be essential for retrieval, marrying LLM, Gen AI, frontier models-based processes with more old school knowledge management, such as knowledge graphs or ontologies. And this is actually, again, talking about the overall architected space that's equally relevant for generation, retrieval, new generation of search, and LLM-based, prompt-based, or RAG-based, or whatever you're doing their processes. So, yeah, I guess that was my answer.
So that is interesting, because I would not have thought that the IA would be as important in this context, but it is part of the pipeline processing, because you still have to do things like chunk it, tag it, and now you have to do that in different languages, and then the meanings of those tags are going to be different, the context will be different, the use cases will vary, and so on.
And from there, it's not only chunking the content. Think about the string length, right? Like let's say you're generating content or translating content for your UI, right? The model can go rogue. The model, even if you tell
Oh,
the
yeah.
model be formal, be like, you can put all the constraints you want, and before you know it, the model needs, I don't know, 40 more characters to dream things up to its liking. Right. So there are also constraints. There are a lot of guardrails that you need to put in
Yeah.
place that people
Yeah.
just don't think about. Tokenizer, you
Yeah.
just said you need to check this content. Like,
Yeah.
I think even the process of tokenization is underestimated, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because whatever you're going to get from bidirectional languages,
Mm-hmm.
right? RTLs and whatever you're going to get from ideographic languages, they all would pose their own tokenization problems.
Interesting. It's so interesting. And there was something that just came to mind as you were speaking about that. And now I've forgotten what that was. But I think that it's interesting that, you talk about how you do have to really think through the pipeline and how that pipeline is going to be different depending upon these languages. When we say there's 7,000 languages in the world, is that an accurate statement, or did my LLM make that up?
No, I did not. Or at least then all my other sources equally make it up. It's I think it's 7,200 something or to
Okay.
7,120. Now it's very important that not all of these languages actually have scripts associated with them, right? Not all of them have glyphs. Not all of them have a writing system. So when we're talking about
Interesting.
spoken languages, obviously we need to be very careful
Yeah.
separating. And that opens another issue in the world of AI, language AI, be it translation or whatnot. What do you do with long tail languages,
Mm.
under-resourced languages, right?
Mm.
I mean, your models are predominantly trained on English or more
Mm.
prevailing language content. Out of
Mm.
these 7,000, I'd probably say that at least half of them, if not over half of them, are underserved in the
Interesting.
universe of natural language processing and AI translation.
Yeah.
Or
Wow.
again, global content. Let's narrow it down to translation.
And what is it what is the number of languages that are kind of what does that long tail look like? What does that head and torso look like in terms of the number of languages that are not commonly, but what does it look like? What, statistically speaking, how does it break down in terms of the number of languages that require a focus and attention in this way?
Okay, the biggest temptation is just quickly launch GPT or Claude on my computer and look it up.
Yeah.
Let me dream things up a little bit. So I would say, let's just chunk it into language families. And let me start with language families that are appropriately served, right? And this is what will give you, again, look at the population, availability of writing system, and representation in the digital space. Right, these would be three factors that would put the languages on either side of the spectrum or on torso in between. So the one, and also maybe the way those languages render themselves to automated language processing. So I would start with Romance languages. If I want to do a demo to a customer and put my best foot forward, grab Latin American Spanish. Why? Huge population, Romance language with not super complex grammar, not super complex morphology, not super complex syntax. So Romance languages would be probably on the ultimate, perfectly served. Then you would go with your Germanic, German being the most complex one of them. Then I would probably from there I would proceed to Slavic. Then from there I would proceed to Asian, be it the usual suspects, the usual four, or Southeast Asian. And then you have things like Finno-Ugric languages, right? Estonian. And this is probably the bulk of what's really served by natural language processing, linguistic community. Then you come with your index. So let's say we just isolated like good 30 languages, right? We isolated good 30 top performers. Then the next batch is probably going to be, let's say, another 30 performers. And that's, for instance, how we think about it at Smartling. And this is where Indic languages would come in, right? A little bit more, still think.
I'm sorry, what languages did you say? Which?
Indic, like Indic, Hindi, Punjabi, all the surrounding. Then you get probably your Turkic, but again, think about it from economic perspective, right? It's not a linguistic phenomenon, it's a sociolinguistic phenomenon. How much can you actually fetch? So I would say that you have probably 150 languages that are well served and well represented. And I think I just delivered the breakdown. But from there, you really move into long tail. And we actually work with, like, for instance, African Language Lab their mission is digitizing African languages. So from there, just imagine, again, geographically, the geos where internet is not necessarily accessible, where kids don't have computers to go to school. And then that would plant your like indigenous languages of South America, African languages. So I think that map, when you think about it, is a very, very intuitive map.
Yeah.
It's tied directly to economic phenomena.
Right. That's very fascinating. And again, didn't think of it in those terms because I'm not a linguistic expert by any means. Well, maybe in English when it comes to information architecture, I know something about linguistics, but not when it comes to multiple languages. By the way, how many languages do you speak out of curiosity?
I mean, right now I'm in my summer home in Mexico, so that gives me broken Spanish.
Okay.
I mean, survival Spanish. I do speak Danish. I mean, I obviously speak Russian. That's my mother tongue. I do speak, just happened geographically because I'm from St. Petersburg in Russia. Just the proximity to the Nordic countries gave me the entire Nordic package. So that would be Danish, Swedish, Norwegian, some kind of broken Icelandic. I read Old Norse, which my son is very proud of. Obviously, had to study Latin. And then from there, I would say probably like reading knowledge, academic knowledge of French and German. So that would give you
a pretty good span.
Yeah, and whatever Yiddish my grandparents spoke at home, but that again, these are childhood memories.
So what did that total up to? Just out of curiosity.
8.
Would you say? 8. Yeah, wow. That's amazing. That's fantastic.
One thing I would want to say though, a lot of people when you say that you're in linguistics field, and you just said it yourself, like you don't necessarily need a foreign language, you need to understand how languages work. Right. And a lot of times people ask us, like, oh, so like myself and my colleagues, how many languages do you speak? And it's important that you do speak foreign languages, but it's more important if you understand the structure of languages.
Right.
And you understand the structural linguistics. Like I don't speak a word of Japanese or a word of Korean, but damn do I know how many difficulties for writing systems introduce for Japanese. So I think it's more marrying your understanding of, yes, not all languages are like your mother tongue, but also really understanding the broader picture. Oh, like RTL. RTL is another great example.
Tell me about RTL in terms of
right to left, right? Again.
Okay. Oh yeah, right to left. Yeah.
Or like code switching languages with busy code switching. I don't speak I don't speak Hindi, but I do know that because of the history of India, the code switching is very prominent.
Tell me what code switching is. I don't know what that is.
Code switching is every computational linguist and natural language processing professional nightmare because it's basically when half the sentence, the language and the script and everything just changes. Like here you were happily living in the Japanese world or Hindi world, and then suddenly in the middle of the sentence you just get a plugin from another language, which is also represented like you're, like say right to left again, like you have Arabic, hello, a plug of English alphabet, and this is where your entire processing chain, unless you've designed it properly, the entire processing is just not doing it.
They just give up. They throw their hands up.
No, not doing it.
So this is also it's interesting because it really does it certainly is representative of the equity and availability and the what am I searching for here? It means that those populations are underrepresented when you don't have those abilities to translate those languages. They're just left out, essentially. Those people are left out. So this is an important perspective from or important issue from that perspective.
In the modern time and day, everybody speaks about digital divide, right? You open any blog, any podcast, and digital divide is a very prominent concept. But I don't think people think enough about linguistic divide. And the universe I operate in, the notion of linguistic divide is essential for us. Obviously, linguistic divide follows digital divide if you don't have any means of accessing digital data. But I think bridging the linguistic divide that's the biggest mission. And people do the most fascinating things. People go out, they record speech. The ASR, right? The automated speech recognition now is at a place, even for languages that the system does not necessarily understand well. The ASR is at a place where you can actually collect spoken data. You can actually develop a written model training corpora out of spoken data. And there's quite a bit of that happening as well.
So what does that mean? And, again, these languages are disappearing as well, right? So does it have some implication around the preservation of these languages in the long term?
It definitely does, but it's a two-edged sword. And yes, indeed, obviously, the more data you collect, the more data you can, the more knowledge you can present to people in their own language, the more you help those languages survive, right? On one hand.
Right.
On the other hand, think about it. The improvements in the quality of translation can actually lead to a completely different story, which might not be the most popular term, but that would be linguistic colonization.
Yes.
Right? Where suddenly, even if it's presented to you in your language, the English language or like English language or other more prominent language centric phenomena can become overbearing even in your own
Right.
language, right? Your
Drown
language
your
may
language.
survive
Yeah.
linguistically, but it's not going to survive conceptually and
Interesting.
anthropologically.
Interesting. Very interesting. So that really is a fascinating approach. Now, we did talk a little bit about regulated industries, financial services, pharma, medical devices, legal. What do you think is legitimate in terms of caution, and what are people what's overblown? So how do you find the line between, something that can be alarmist versus something that is, more practical? So how do you see that spectrum?
Okay, generally, regulated industries have been much slower at adopting any kind of NLP or even
Mm,
like global content transformation management, just because of the liabilities and the risks. And
mm,
usually, even in the early days of machine translation, heavy machinery would already be covered, right? And
mhm.
by the way, in heavy machinery, or like if your engine says press this lever or pull this lever or do not pull this lever, next thing you know, you could have dropped a whole crane, right, and destroy
No,
the
right.
entire construction site. But a risk, they were much more, those industries were much less risk averse. Regulated industries, just because of the compliance issues,
Mm,
were slow to the party and still are
that's
slow to the
interesting.
party.
Yeah.
It's InfoSec, it's PII, right? Like
Mhm.
just the fact of PII leakage. There are a lot of legitimate concerns, but the thing is, they're all mitigatable,
Right. Okay.
right?
Okay.
And
Talk
there are
about that.
different means of doing it. There are different means of doing it.
So what are some of the mitigation? What are some of the steps to mitigation of those
Okay.
risks?
I just use PII, PHI, right?
Mhm.
The biggest concern is like, hey, my patient's PII or
Mhm.
PHI is going to leak. And
Mhm.
obviously, it's just the normal IT precautions, right? And
Mhm.
obviously, making sure that all your connectors, all the APIs speak to APIs in the most secure manner. That's one, right? And that's where you preserve the leakage. If you're using commercial models, obviously, make sure that all your SLAs, all your agreements with commercial models are what's called zero trace, right? Where they
Mhm.
cannot like even cache your data, right? So not caching the data, making sure that none of your
Mhm.
data can be used for training, right? Private
Mhm.
keys are essential. Like you always want to make sure that somehow
Right.
your instance is private and not shared
Right.
with anybody. And like even PA, PHA masking,
Mhm.
paraphrasing, there are
Sure.
so many techniques that actually
Mhm.
can be put in place to protect your
Mhm.
customer data.
So it's
Hallucination.
just typical stuff that you have to do anyway in protecting that data. Yeah.
You have to, but I think it's blown out of proportion, the risks. And
Mhm.
a lot of times I see the InfoSec questionnaires and I'm like, okay, well, this is 10 years ago. This is from 5 years ago. We've really made so much more progress since then. And yeah, I just gave you the most obvious examples. The one area of NLP is actually, you mentioned PDFs. Regulated industries are way ahead of everybody else when it comes to OCR, right?
Yes.
Reason being, if you're medical, I mean, you first of all, they were dealing maybe military, right? DoD and or whatever military sector and regulated industries are dealing with much more handwritten content than anybody else,
I see. Yeah. Right.
right?
Interesting.
Or a flat PDF that you just like, you have an archive of 45,000 cabinets, all of them filled with PDFs, then you need to OCR them.
Right.
That's one place, and that actually paved way to faster adoption of AI by
Mm.
regulated industries because they were already halfway there,
Right. Right.
right?
Understood.
Being able to digitize their assets.
Interesting. Interesting. So when you start thinking about what happened when you've seen this industry change through all these different architectural shifts, and what changed when LLMs arrived, and what did that unlock that was not possible with, say, neural machine translation and other approaches? Because I see them on a spectrum, but maybe I'm not understanding it as well. So what is your take on how LLMs changed the landscape?
Well, I would say that, I mean, first and foremost, God, I still live in the previous century, 2017, right? When Transformers, as we know them, attention is all you need, or attention is what you need, when this famous Google research paper came out,
Mm,
right? And introduced transformer models, give or take, as we know them, right? That
mm,
was probably the first breakthrough, right? And that's
mm,
where neural machine translation, deep learning based machine translation took over. And
mm,
again, other approaches, based linguistic approaches for other use cases based on that. So that kind of paved way
mhm,
to where we are now with LLMs. Now,
mm,
the constraint was, and in knowledge management and in other applications queries, the constraint was always that neural machine translation is generally operating within sentence boundaries, and all the APIs and all the processing, actually, it all would send one chunk of text, right? It's literally operating between start of sentence, end of sentence. And I would say the two major breakthroughs with LLMs were, one, that next generation of transformer models, right? The whole notion of pre-trained generated transformers, which is basically next generation, right? It killed the two previous iterations. So one. Second is, again, the attention mechanism was completely overhauled for what you do and how you actually parse out your content. Just the number of parameters, right? GPT-1 was also an LLM. BERT was also an LLM. But once you go into those massive foundational models, just the number of parameters and the volume of training text unlocked the accessibility to unlocked access to different domains, different languages. Again, right? Because as much as was mostly English centric, you still could access different languages. I would say the biggest and the hugest unlock was context. As I said, NMT operating neural models, generally operating within sentence boundaries. And suddenly things like resolving pronouns, resolving homonyms, resolving ambiguity in terminology, all of it became a non-issue, right? As long as you can operate on a chunk level, or even better so, document level. So that would probably be the biggest unlock.
That's so interesting. Yeah, I had not thought of that. So we've also kind of talked a little bit about this, but we know that are there assumptions that translation works equally well across all languages? Obviously not, because there's underserved languages, and that's a dangerous misconception. Where does it break down, and is it just a matter of these underserved languages? Like, where else does it break down when you start looking at these language families, and what else do people need to think about when it comes to the effectiveness of machine translation?
Well, again, it's AI translation or content translation, content generation, or anything else. I would say, yes, obviously it's the representation of the training data. Again, the quality of tokenizers is a big issue, right? If you cannot tokenize your text properly, that's another breaking point. Next breaking point would be just pure linguistic complexity of language, right? If you look at Finno-Ugric languages, I don't speak Hungarian, but if I'm not mistaken, we're talking like 16 cases for nouns, and I forgot how many conjugations. So obviously, more grammatically complex languages, obviously they introduce additional level of complexity. Then again, let me think what else. And again, like I would use Japanese as an example, the presence of 4 writing systems, obviously that's another one, right? Where you need to pivot between different writing systems there. Each of language families comes with its own complexities, but I would probably call out like grammatic complexity is probably the main one. Take German, for instance. There is another, everybody's favorite is German compounds, for instance, and that would not be an issue for, say, Slavic languages, but German compounds where you can actually append a stem and a stem and a stem and a stem and a stem, right? Before you know it, you have like 40 letters in your word, and go parse it out and go parse the meaning of it out.
Right. Interesting. That's fascinating. So one of the things that we sort of touched on, but didn't get into, but information architecture and its relationship to language translation. So when content coming into the pipeline is fragmented, inconsistently structured, using different terminology across systems, right? That's an information architecture problem. So what does good information architecture look like as a foundation for translation? And then what happens when it's missing?
It's in equal part, as I said, it's in equal parts an engineering issue, right? Because if you cannot parse out the input properly, right? If the input cannot reduce itself to a place where a model can handle it properly, that would probably be the first breaking point, right? If you cannot reduce it to, like, say, JSON, or there is a standard in our industry, which is a flavor XML called XLIF. If you cannot parse your content out properly and feed it into the system, that's one breaking point. I will use, for instance, subtitles, right? Subtitles, back to your initial comment about use cases, which are good use cases for like good enough subtitling speeches, subtitling presentations. That's a
Mm.
great one.
Mhm.
Until you
Yeah.
start thinking that like a format, subtitling format like SRT is actually, what is it? It's a sentence, but then it's also chunks within the sentence, right?
Mhm.
Human intonation, prosody, a human made
Mhm.
pause. And before you know it, you're not dealing with a sentence or segment, you're actually dealing with completely random chunks.
Mhm.
So that part of architecture, you actually need to be able to stitch it back together,
Mm.
make it understandable, but then chunk it to a place where subtitles actually, with toggles and timestamps and everything else, where subtitles actually usable
Mm.
for
Mhm.
your generated or translated content. So these are the things that you need to think through. Easier content
Mhm.
engineering wise, suitable
Yeah.
for natural language processing, whatever direction it takes.
Right.
Rendering, understanding, natural language understanding, natural NLU, NLG, NLP,
Mhm.
and all of those. And this is where, again, a lot of people very much underestimate it. As I said, like a bunch of nested HTML tags. If
Mm.
you have not figured out a way of filtering them out properly, that's going to break things completely. So it's data integrity, not just from linguistic perspective,
Right.
but it's just pure hygiene and governance, right?
Interesting.
In terms of
Yeah.
storage, your database architecture.
Yeah.
If you build homegrown systems and just came up with your own standard, you're on your
Yeah.
own. Go build it.
Yeah.
It's
Right.
nobody
Right.
can be there to help.
It's so interesting how it all does keep, boiling down to structure and architecture. And, I just spoke at an event held by the conference board. They have a KM council. And one of the things that they're dealing with, the folks that are leading knowledge management initiatives in these large enterprises is, hey, we have AI. Why do we need KM, right? Why do we need knowledge? And at the end of the day, AI is not going to work if your knowledge is not there, or if it's junk, or if it's messy, or if it's unstructured, if it's not curated, if it's not organized, if it's not chunked, if it's not tagged, right? All of that. And it's interesting to see that translation is coming down to the same fundamental principles, right?
And think about how much your model can learn from a simple ontology, right? If you have a simple ontology with representation of all the dependencies, it definitely informs your model in a much better way than just like, random soup of unstructured content. And that's where I'm saying marrying the two schools of thought is probably
Yeah.
the most promising field right now.
Yeah.
The problem is that if you don't have any foundation, building a knowledge
Right.
base is extremely expensive,
Right.
right?
Right.
Even if you do it in the most automated way.
Well, yeah, and some of it can be accelerated, but yeah, you're right. There's a lot of challenges, but there can be some AI tools that will accelerate that, but you still need the right structure, you still need the right frameworks, you still need the right methodologies and examples and so on. So it certainly can accelerate things. And so we were just talking about this. So, a hybrid approach that combines LLMs with structured knowledge, with ontologies, with small language models, rule-based systems. When does each layer kind of earn its place? And how do you decide what that right combination is? And again, when I say small language models, even when you're building your ontology and you're building your taxonomies, it's a subset of language model that is more fine-tuned to your content, right? Your domain and your world, right? So that it gives additional context. So talk a little bit more about how those things work together and how they build.
Let me think about it. So, first thing, maybe we could get small language models out of the way first,
Yeah.
because that's the easiest one. That's the lowest hanging fruit,
Mhm.
right? When you look at frontier models, they are jack of all trades.
Yeah.
They can
Right.
do 1,000 things. So
Yeah.
when here at Smartling, what we experimented quite a bit with and getting a lot of successes with is actually build a purpose-built model that is suited specifically for language tasks. And luckily, being a platform, we obviously have enough performance data, right? And we have enough of actual linguistic data to inform that small model to actually do what it should be doing. It can be customer specific, domain specific, or it can just be more generalized. But still, the expectation is that this model is there for translation.
Translation, so it's specialized to the task, but then it can also be subspecialized to the domain, to the industry, to the client world, right? Even if you're in the same industry and you do things differently, you name things differently, and so on. Yeah.
Yeah, you can funnel in. You can funnel in as much as you wish. So I think small language models, again, they would have their place because they would probably require much less effort in terms of getting them focused on what matters, and in our case, global content transformation, right? Because all the dances, right, all the tribal dances that you need to perform around frontier models, they're much more complex because you need to extract a specific task out of a multitask model, right? And this is where everything can potentially break, or you need to fine tune. Fine tuning still works, although we just had meetings with most of the major frontier model providers. We just did a tour around different conferences. It looks like fine tuning is still a thing, but it's giving RAG. Now we're going to get to your knowledge management. It's giving way to RAG or agentic retrieval, which is not like basically next generation of RAG, right? Because fine tuning, again, it's expensive. It can be time consuming. You still need to curate your data if you want to fine tune your smaller model or fine tune your foundational model. So data curation still has its place. But for retrieval, and now we've gotten to the retrieval part, retrieval is only as good as your linguistic assets are and the structure of your linguistic assets, right? Because if you're giving it examples and it's retrieving garbage, you're not getting anywhere. So that's where we work with, again, I'm speaking from Smartling perspective because that's what I do day in and day out. We absolutely work with our customers on data governance, data curation, data structure, data organization, and help them. It's a prequel, right? So it's the prerequisite. You need to curate your data, right? You need to have your data governed. You need to have it in a structured fashion. You need to have either semantic relations, or you need to have very clear taxonomy, whichever comes first. If you have enough metadata, obviously you can get by with the taxonomy. If you don't have enough metadata, you obviously need to build up semantic relations. But that's the ultimate foundation.
Yeah.
Healthy data for retrieval or fine-tuning. You're not going to get anywhere without it. So I would say prerequisite, then data manipulation, whatever you've been able to do with different prompting techniques, or older school, like we do, for instance, we still use quite a bit of Elasticsearch in different applications that we use, like keyword extraction. So I think data governance, figuring out the right tooling. You said in the beginning of this conversation something that really resonated with me. Don't do it if you don't need to do it. Right. Or I'm paraphrasing you in the most, maybe not necessarily most elegant way, but I think one of mistakes people make when they implement AI is basically art for art's sake. Don't touch what's not broken.
Right. Simpler is better. And if you can get away with it, great. But if your use case demands it, and your data, your validation, your metrics show that you cannot satisfy the use case unless you have these prerequisites, that's when you have to really focus on building that foundation. I like what you referred to as tribal dances. The tribal dances you have to go through to deal with these large language models, and to subset them out, and to get them to specialize and do the things you want, right? And knowledge provisioning and methodology provisioning is all part of that, to give that context. And then those smaller language models, which represent your world. So that really has application to everything, right?
And they can work in accord. Again, sometimes you can get whatever you need, the basics, you can get it from the frontier model, and then you augment it with a second layer of small language model, which is task specific. So, and again, it's a matter of funneling into your task.
Yep. Great. And when you start thinking about, an AI first translation workflow, how do you integrate human review, right? That's still essential, especially with higher risk things. How are you making those decisions based on risk, and how are they integrated into the workflow?
Let me come back to you with a question. Do you see where major AI developers are spending most money right now? I mean, okay, data centers and GPUs aside, what is the second hugest line item for them, right? And the hugest, what do you think it is?
Go ahead. You're asking it as a rhetorical question, but go ahead.
Yeah, it wasn't rhetorical. I was curious. But anyways, it's data. It's developing human curated data sets. Right? A ton of money is poured into, because why? We've already scrapped everything we could. Right, the data drift, and the data does not evolve as fast as the need for the models that are hungry for high quality curated data. So the human in the loop is now, I mean, they're making billions of money just putting human labels and human annotators in place. Now think about our universe. If you want to ship on-brand high quality content, high quality, you absolutely need a human review and human correction. And we have the content sensitivity and risk tolerance matrix, which is actually divided by markets. And I just did a presentation with, should probably not mention the client, but I just did a presentation at a conference there where we spoke about AI positive and AI negative markets. So it's the market tolerance, and then it's the content type tolerance. And then you phase in the human review, which can be light human review for spot checking for more glaring errors, or you phase in human review where you really have super high sensitivity to the quality of the content. Now, you can still obviously, and huge chunk of our business is just fully automated translation, fully automated AI translation, and it works. And because we deliver bespoke solutions, as I said, we're using RAG, we're using customer-specific linguistic assets. It's higher quality than what you can get out of the foundational frontier model. Still, if you think about it, without at least a little bit of content coming from human review, how are you expecting your models to evolve?
Right?
If you don't have human reference. And that's why it's like, for instance, we run this tool called LQA agent, which is basically automated linguistic quality assurance agent. But the best way for the model to learn is to make sure that the model agrees with direct assessment by humans. And there you are, no humans, no direct assessment.
Right. Yeah. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, it's very, very simple, right? If you want your models to evolve and if you want your models to learn, you obviously need somewhere for these models to learn from. And this is where a human review, it's always twofold. It's guaranteeing the quality to your customers and helping your models evolve.
Right. And it's like ground truth for RAG, right? Where does ground truth come from? It comes from somebody saying that's a good answer, right?
Correct. Correct.
You do need to have an LLM check the LLM because you will have model drift, right? And you'll have, LLMs to not stop following your directions quietly, silently, and silently fail. So you absolutely do have to have that. It's really interesting. I mean, we see that quite a bit, and that's why we need LLMs to judge the output of LLMs, but humans to judge the ground truth that goes into the assessment, right?
The ground truth needs to come from somewhere, and maybe the volume of the ground truth is shrinking. The need, right? Because you need fewer, you can get by with like a single shot or like one shot or like zero shot references. So maybe the volume of that ground truth can shrink, but you cannot completely get rid of that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Comes back with an interesting paradox. I just want to say one quick thing.
Please.
When it comes to judgment, what we find out is humans the agreement between human and the model is half the problem. The real problem is the subjectivity of human reviewers and human annotators. Not only do they not agree between themselves, if a reviewer or an annotator can be in a good mood on Monday and in a bad mood on Wednesday, and that same person would judge the same output in a completely different way. And one of the things that my team works a lot on, how do we extract the most objective, if objectivity can even be applied to human judgment, how do we extract the most objective ground truth set to train the model of what's hypothetically is true.
Right. That is fascinating because you're right. One of the things about, say machine tagging is they may get it wrong, but they get it wrong consistently, right? Humans get it wrong inconsistently or get it right inconsistently. And yes, there's a lot of subjectivity there. And it does depend on, did you have your double shot of espresso this morning or were you too late to your regular barista wasn't in?
Yeah. But you'd be surprised, actually. Sometimes the model, what we come across, and that's why it's important to have second model judge the output of first model. Model can also be inconsistent in its judgment. Like we have a technique called feedback loop where the model says, this was a mistake, correct it. You go and correct it, and then the model goes, no, what did you just do? Actually, it was correct. Now it is a mistake. So to mitigate the model hallucinations, and as you said, like model can get a mind of its own and start making decisions and stop obeying your instructions. The whole hallucination mitigation and model predictability, that's another thing that's essential to get reasonable output and reasonable judgments out of them.
It's another metric that you need to look at. And being able to establish all of those different metrics to say where are the boundaries, when do you escalate, how do you measure hallucination, how do you measure groundedness, citability, all of those things are part of that. Yeah, absolutely. So very good to have you. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing your 25 years of expertise in this field. It was a fascinating discussion. Any final thoughts for executives or technology and business leaders as they look at this space?
Okay, so I was asked the same question 2 years ago or 3 years ago. And at the time, my response was that right now we're like this, everybody's in love with LLMs and what they can do. And then it was implement and fail 85% of time, as we know from the statistics. And now I think we're finally in a place of measured deployments. So measure, right? As we say in Russian, measure 7 times, cut once. Measure, understand that you have the real use case. understand the use case. And as we were talking throughout this conversation, do not underestimate the complexities.
Yeah.
Your engineers, you think you have the most brilliant engineers, which I'm sure you do, but do they speak all the languages? Do they know all the intricacies that you and I just spoke about? Not necessarily. So ROI, use case, and don't underestimate the complexities.
Wonderful.
Don't pour your time and money into something that experts can do for you.
Wonderful. Well, thank you again. Appreciate you joining us, and it really helps to understand the level of nuance that goes into something like this. And you certainly opened my eyes to a lot of those details. And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in to the Early AI podcast. Be sure to subscribe for more conversations about how AI is shaping the future of business. Again, Olga, thank you for your time today.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you for joining us on another deep dive into AI innovation. Tune in next time when we introduce another industry expert and discuss how to maximize AI in your world. The Early AI podcast is sponsored by Early Information Science and Vector. To learn more, visit early.com. That's EARLEY.com. Thank you for tuning in.